Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Merit TV Canada's Election Watch. We are just days away now from April 28th, voting day on Monday. We have a lot to go through and analyze, and several things I want to get to right off the hop before I talk about the idea of who are we as Canadians and what is our identity, which is an important issue to understand, but also to take into consideration when electing and trying to move a liberal or conservative party into government, because we need to know who we are and able to achieve where we want to go. But before we do that, there's something that was interesting that popped up yesterday that I wanted to touch on. It was Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP party. One of the comments that he specifically made, and he quote says, "To stop Pierre Poilievre, I put Canada before the NDP." Now, it is everyone's knowledge knows that Jagmeet Singh had support for the Liberal Party. Everyone knew that he was actually holding the balance of power with supporting Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, from stopping the Conservatives from actually going and having a vote of non-confidence against Justin Trudeau. And he is now stating that he wanted to stop Pierre Poilievre so much that he put the Canadian people before his own party, the NDP, which is really interesting to see, because as we are walking through this election, we have seen the downfall of the NDP. We are watching the downfall of leader Jagmeet Singh as we move towards Monday. The party is polling at less than 10%. There's a chance that they might not even keep their official party status after election day. There's a really good chance Jagmeet Singh does not keep his own seat in the House of Commons. This is a big turnaround. But I'm trying to understand what is driving Jagmeet Singh to want to stop Pierre Poilievre. Because when you look at what Mark Carney is stating, when you look at Pierre Poilievre and what he is stating, there are, from both sides of the party, there is nothing that seems completely outrageous or dangerous to what Canada is or where it's coming, especially coming off of 10 years of Canada sliding down in the ranks in many, many factors and ways that we measure the success and the ability of a country to move forward. Canada has slid down the ranks in per capita GDP. I think they're the second last on the top 35 of the OECD countries. We've had 1.4% GDP growth over 10 years. We are not attracting any new investment into Canada. We're having top talent leave to go to other places. We're having housing issues, immigration issues. So taking all of that into consideration, I am really trying to wrap my head around what is the danger around, like you look at both parties' platform, and there's nothing that in my mind seems to be outright to destroy Canada. There's different perspectives, there's different goals, there's different ideologies that drive what the Liberals are doing and drive what the Conservatives. So I'm not understanding what Jagmeet Singh is doing here. But the thing that we can assess and we can look at is Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, they are going to pay the price for the stance that he has done. He's saying he's putting Canadians before his own NDP party. Some people might argue that Jagmeet was putting himself before Canadians and his own party by actually supporting the Liberals so there would not be a vote so he could get his pension. There's an argument to be said about that. There's also an argument to be said that while looking at the different platforms as to which one we want to go forward, there's also an argument to be made that the Liberal platform can actually support Jagmeet Singh better. So we have to analyze that too. But as we move towards this election day on Monday, April 28th, it is important to understand what does each party represent. One of the things that we do have to realize and we have to figure out is who are we as Canadians. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that we are a post-nationalist state. He mentioned recently, I believe it was in January or December on American television, when he was asked, what does it mean to be Canadian? He said, well, we're not American. What is our identity? Who are we as Canadians? Which party leader answers that question the best for you? Is it Jagmeet Singh? Because I don't think he has a definition. Mark Carney is stating certain things that who we are as Canadians, that we will be an energy superpower, that we are going to transition away from oil and gas, and that we are going to help build and redefine and reimagine who we are as Canadians fundamentally. He's offering a certain vision. Pierre Poilievre is offering a vision of reason and logic and saying we want to come back where hard-working Canadians can live on a safe street and earn a good home. these are the type of things that we have to assess, and we have to look at who do we want to be as Canadians. Ask yourself, who do you want to be as Canada, as a Canadian? And which party aligns the most with that? Which party sets forth the path to which we can achieve what it means to be a Canadian? Truly a Canadian. I know that we're hardworking. We're full of ingenuity. I know that there's a lot of amazing people in Canada. We love our landscape from sea to sea. We live in a wonderful country. We used to be in one of the top happiest countries and the happiest places to live in the world. Canadians are wonderful people, and we do have a place in the world. I 100% believe that Canada can be a world leader. So as we move to the polls on Monday, I believe that Canadians, we're going to be able to, as a democracy, answer that question as who do we want to be as the next government represents us as Canadians. Would you stick with us? We'll be back right after the break. Well, welcome back to Merit TV Canada's Election Watch. Happy Friday to wherever we find you. This evening, I'm joined by Rupa Subramania. Thank you for joining me again, Rupa. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, David. Thanks for having me back again.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure doing this in the last several weeks as we move towards Monday, April 28th, Election Day. The ultimate poll, as we've been kind of joking, is coming up right after the weekend. It's been interesting to see what's been evolving over this past week. There's been a little bit of a tightening in the polls, and both parties are hitting campaigns pretty heavy this weekend. I know Pierre Poilievre was in Calgary today, and he's going to be moving into BC over the weekend and back to Ontario. So it is interesting to see how things are going to play out. I'm not asking you to look into a crystal ball, but any thoughts? How do you think, or how are you feeling towards Monday, how it's going to unfold?
Oh, I have no idea. I think I've mentioned this before. As far as polls are concerned, I take them with a grain of salt. They're interesting. They're indicative. They indicate a trend, but I've said this before, a dart throwing monkey has more accuracy than a poll. So that's my position on polls. But we'll see. I mean, obviously, it's going to be closely contested election. It has been.
That's right.
And I'm prepared for anything really Monday.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I'm ready to be surprised. If there are surprises, I'm ready if all of a sudden a blue wave seems to hit and the polls have been wrong. It'll be interesting to see how it unfolds. But I like that line you said. I'm going to steal that, but I'll give you credit when I do steal it. So it's a good one. I want to move our attention to a couple key issues, I think, that don't get talked about enough. And it does tie back to our government's ties back to immigration policies. It ties back even to media and stories that they pick up and run. And what tipped this off was last week after the debates, Rosemary Barton of CBC made a statement stating that there were bodies found in the mass graves when it comes to Catholic residential schools. And CBC had to walk that back the day before or the day after. And you go back to when this first broke several years ago, and you saw how fast the media ran with this story and how it became worldwide news. I know you covered it. We know lots of people that had talked about it. And it led to an incident that happened where you had not just several, you had multitudes of churches that were burnt down. And Justin Trudeau, former Prime Minister of Canada, even made a statement that the hatred was justified to a certain extent. I might be using the wrong words, but that was the sentiment of what he was saying. And I wanted to get a little bit of your thoughts on that, because also recently there was a terrorist attack that happened in India. That was obviously, it was a horrific scene that happened there. I believe it was in disputed territory between Pakistan and India in the northern part there. And you had Canadian politicians who did not use very strong language. You'd call it soft language compared to what you find in the U.S. with politicians who called it for what it was. I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, and why do you think we have a problem with Canadian politicians with drawing a line on certain incidents like that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So David, so first with the church burnings, I wrote about it in my latest newsletter for the Free Press that just came out yesterday, and I wrote it because the CBC had to walk back a claim Rosemary Barton, the journalist Rosemary Barton, made on the CBC after the French debate during the media scrum, when Rebel News reporter Drea Humphrey posed a question to NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, asking him if he would denounce anti-Christian hate in light of the 2021 wave of church burnings and vandalism across Canada, when he's so quick to call out things like Islamophobia and white supremacy. And if you recall, in 2021, there was this announcement of a discovery of mass graves in British Columbia, and 215 potential unmarked graves, and it was widely reported, and there was a lot of media reporting of it. It got international attention, as you say. The New York Times also went with the headline, 215 unmarked graves of Indigenous children found. And the reporting, or rather the misreporting, led to widespread public outrage. There was a sense of national moral panic. If you remember, the flag was lowered to half-mast for months on end, and it just led to a lot of self-flagellation of what it means to be Canadian. And the question, so when Rosemary Barton, she was actually questioning Drea Humphrey's line of questioning to Jagmeet Singh, saying that she was misrepresenting the truth, and that indeed the bodies of Indigenous children have been found. And so then the CBC had to walk back that claim, which was quite extraordinary. This is 4 years later. Despite all of the reporting, this is the first time we've had any kind of correction to this narrative. So my question was, well, why did it take this incident for the CBC to issue a correction? And so I've been thinking about that quite a bit, and I wrote this in my newsletter, and I said, well, I think perhaps it's because Justin Trudeau called the anger fully understandable. The media contextualized the church burnings. So the church burnings happened after the graves had been discovered, and dozens of churches burned across the country. And Justin Trudeau said the anger is fully understandable. The media contextualizes this. They say, well, church burnings are wrong, but here is why it's happening. It was just really, and the cases, for my newsletter, I tried to look, I wanted to see if anybody had been arrested, and I read a report by the Macdonald-Laurier Institute that less than 4% of these cases, less than 4% of the people involved in these church burnings and vandalism have actually been arrested, and most of these cases have been closed. So the question for me is, well, what if 100 mosques had burned across Canada? What would the reaction have been? Why is it that we're okay with churches burning? Why is no one talking about this? To his credit, Pierre Poilievre, I remember at that time, did call it out. So, and he has spoken out against it. But it's just extraordinary that none of these other that first of all, Jagmeet Singh refused to even comment on this when he was asked this question last week. I think that's not a good thing that's not a good thing from a politician. I find that extraordinary that after 4 years we finally have some pathway to the truth.
Do you think that there is this a Canadian identity issue? Is this a politician thing that's afraid to maybe speak out against certain acts like this? Is it allowable for things like this to happen to a Christian faith or a Catholic faith and it kind of be swept under the rug? I'm just trying to figure out, why is that okay in our country, and why has it been okay by also Canadian citizens to not call it out more?
Well, I think because I think we've taken Canadian culture and identity for granted for a very, very long time. And I mean, that we could do an entire podcast, a 3-hour podcast discussing what is Canadian culture and identity, and why are we in this situation right now where Christian churches can burn and they're attacked, and it's a hate crime.
Yes.
It's a hate crime, but we're busy contextualizing and excusing what happened. And a lot of it also has to do with Justin Trudeau saying that Canada doesn't really have an identity. It's a post-national state. And all of those things have clearly not helped. But it's important, when politicians call out wokeism, Pierre Poilievre says he stands against woke ideology. But he's got to be a little more specific. I appreciate the fact that he's standing up for John A. Macdonald, and that he would restore these statues that have been vandalized over the years. But I also think that it's important that politicians stand up for Canadian culture and identity. And what that really means are going back to the foundations of Canada.
Yes.
Our foundational values are Western culture and civilization. And someone needs to stand up for that. And that means our Christian faith. I say this as a Hindu.
Yes. No, agreed, Rupa. And I think this is an important issue as we move towards the polls, because this idea of who are we as Canadians has been amplified even in the wake of Donald Trump and his ideas of the 51st state, and Alberta talking about potential independence. And Justin Trudeau was even on U.S. programming, I believe, in January. And when he was asked, what is it to mean to be Canadian, he kind of answered, well, we're not American. And it seems to be this vague sense of what is a Canadian. And recently I was interviewing Bruce Pardy, and he said, well, a big part of our identity actually comes from the rejection back in 1776 when America left the crown, but what was of Canada at the moment wanted to stick with what they were, and there was a rejection of what America was doing. But there seems to be this lack of national identity, at least from the circles I've been questioning, a lot of people asking. And that's why I wanted to go this direction, because as we are voting, I believe in a strong Canada. I believe that we have got the right ingredients to have a wonderful country that can continue to prosper and thrive. But part of it is also knowing who we are. And in order to stand up for what you believe in, you have to know what you believe in. And that's why it's important to look at our politicians and what they're stating when it comes to these things.
Absolutely. See, a country that doesn't cherish its culture and identity is going to be adrift and unanchored, and that's where Canada is right now. Yes, exactly.
Just in the last minute or so that we have, or if we need a little bit longer, we'll take it. But there was a terrorist attack that happened in India recently, and I believe you were tweeting about this a little bit. U.S. politicians have been naming and calling the Islamists behind the attack for what they were. Canadian politicians seem to be a lot softer on that. Can you fill us in on that, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so quickly, David, 26 people were killed and 17 others were injured in this terrorist attack. Several reports indicate that the attackers, there were Islamist terrorists coming from Pakistan, singled out the victims by checking their IDs and forcing men to undress to confirm if they were Hindu. And they were executed based on the fact that they were Hindus. Meanwhile, back here in Canada, it took Mark Carney 2 days to respond to this, and coincidentally, it happened after I flagged his silence on X. Okay. And even the Taliban government in Afghanistan condemned the attack before Carney. Pierre Poilievre issues a statement, but neither he nor Carney mentioned India or acknowledged that the Islamist extremists were behind the massacre. So just briefly, Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India, although part of the region remains under illegal Pakistani occupation. So by omitting any reference to India, Hindus, or Islamist terror, Carney and Poilievre, whether knowingly or not, lend credence to the Islamist narrative that seeks to distort this decades-long conflict in that area and whitewash its religious targeting. in stark contrast, put President Trump and Vance and everybody in the U.S. administration on both sides of the aisle quickly condemned the attacks, mentioning India by name and that the terrorists were Islamist radicals, and we've not had something similar from Canadian leaders. And I should mention, India is probably the only country after Israel in having been ravaged by Islamic terrorism over the years. And it's extraordinary that Canada doesn't acknowledge this or support India, the world's largest democracy, in its fight against terrorism. The bilateral relationship with India is already really, really bad, and it doesn't appear that any of the major party leaders have any interest in trying to fix that relationship.
This may be, okay, I'm going to ask a question, a pretty frank question. Does this have anything to do with, India is a big immigration partner, if you want to call that, with Canada. And there is a Khalistani movement that has been moving within Canada. Does this have anything to do with that, with wanting to separate voters or losing maybe some momentum in certain ridings? Thoughts on that as we move into the election?
It could be. The Khalistani presence is very... that they're in all major parties, and the Khalistani extremism has. Terry Milevsky actually has documented this, that Khalistani extremism often is in a tactical alliance with Islamic extremism, because their common enemy is India. So that could be one reason why neither Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre didn't mention India or call out Islamic extremism in their statements. And it could also be that the bilateral relationship over the last couple of years under Trudeau has really deteriorated, and so maybe they just didn't think that India was worth mentioning. But I think it's a very foolish thing to do, given that it is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. It's a counterweight to China, and certainly the Trump administration and other countries have condemned these attacks and named India, but Canada is the only country that has just not bothered to do that.
Yeah. Well, Rupa, we are out of time, and the geopolitics is a very important part of our leadership of our country and how they're going to handle, but also call out things that happen in different countries, especially with what happened in India. What we tolerate is what we allow and we're okay with, and that's why it's very important to know what our leaders stand, where they stand on issues that happen like this. But anyways, Rupa, I'll end it on that. Thank you for joining us again, Rupa. So appreciate your thoughts. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Merit TV Canada's Election Watch. I'm David Craig. Hope you enjoyed that chat with Rupa. Hey, just in the closing minutes before we actually all go to weekend and enjoy our time before Election Day on Monday, there's a couple things I want to bring our attention to, and I want you to ask yourself the question. When analyzing the platforms from both parties and also the statements that Mark Carney's been making or Pierre Poilievre is making, there's one fundamental difference that I have been noticing, and it really comes back to government doing the work instead of free enterprise, or allowing Canadians and free enterprise and private business to do the work that we want in Canada. For example, Mark Carney has stated things like he wants to build Canada again. He started talking about new crown corporations to build homes, to build housing. What that stands for is government bringing a solution to a problem that we have here in Canada. Pierre Poilievre wants to incentivize Canadians and Canadian companies to build the homes, to thrive, and to be able to bring that to market to help relieve the housing issue. The key fundamental is citizens doing the work or having the government doing the work. And you can see this all throughout the platforms. And you have to answer that question. Is that something that you want the government to continue? Because they have stated in the past about building pipelines, building roads, building bridges, light rail transit. We've seen it fail over and over again. And I personally believe that when you have too big of a government, too much bureaucracy, is that you lose efficiency, you lose money, you lose value, and you don't come up with what you actually need, which is real solutions. I believe those real solutions can be found between you and I as citizens, as people who can use our brains, build companies, build jobs to allow people to work and actually bring solutions that Canada needs. Conservatives and the Liberals, they differ on this in a big way. Analyze the platforms, find out who you want to lead this country, because we are all going to the polls on Monday to vote for a new government to come, a potentially new government to lead our country into the future. Thank you for watching with us. My name is David Craig. This is Merit TV Canada's Election Watch.